In 2006, human arrogance erased Pluto from our solar system, reclassifying it as a frozen corpse drifting in the dark abyss. For nearly a decade, science believed this distant world was absolutely dead. However, when the New Horizons spacecraft pierced that darkness in 2015, incoming telemetry data violently broke established astronomical models. Principal investigator Alan Stern stated the scientific community was entirely unprepared for this reality. Transmitted images revealed towering mountains of solid water ice, landscapes covered in blood-red snow, and a massive churning heart of boiling toxic nitrogen. What the New Horizons probe saw next would completely shatter everything we thought we knew about the outer darkness. The journey into the abyss required profound patience and unmatched engineering. The New Horizons spacecraft traveled through the freezing void at 50,000 miles per hour. This relentless, silent voyage lasted for nearly a decade. However, deep inside this mechanical explorer rested something deeply human. The spacecraft carried a small aluminum capsule containing the ashes of Clyde Tombaugh, the astronomer who first discovered this distant world in the year 1930. Across billions of miles of empty space, a human being was finally stepping onto the frozen shores of his life's greatest discovery. It was a beautiful culmination of human curiosity. Yet, as the spacecraft pushed further away from Earth, the familiar warmth of our solar system faded into absolute darkness. For an observer standing on the surface of this distant world, the concept of daytime would completely change. At noon, the sky does not turn a bright blue. Instead, it remains a pitch-black canopy. The sun, located over 3 billion miles away, shrinks until it loses its blinding shape and life-giving heat. It becomes nothing more than a brilliantly bright point of light hanging in a permanent, gloomy twilight. It is a world locked in an eternal dusk, where the ambient light is hundreds of times weaker than a heavily cloudy afternoon back on Earth. When the cameras finally illuminated this darkness, humanity was presented with an image that immediately captured the public imagination. Spread across the equator was a massive, pale feature perfectly shaped like a giant heart. The global media quickly embraced it as a cosmic symbol of love. However, planetary scientists analyzing the incoming data recognized a much more terrifying reality. This pristine white heart, officially named Sputnik Planitia, is not a gentle geological feature. It is a violent impact crater spanning exactly 1,000 miles across the planetary surface. What actually fills this massive basin completely defies standard planetary physics. According to official space agency data, this enormous heart is fundamentally an ocean. However, it is absolutely not an ocean of liquid water. It is a colossal, churning sea made entirely of slushy, frozen nitrogen mixed with methane and carbon monoxide. In these extreme negative temperatures, one might expect this toxic sea to be completely solid, static, and scientifically dead. Yet, the scientific instruments revealed something deeply unsettling. Deep beneath the thick frozen crust, the rocky core of the planet still holds a tiny fraction of ancient radioactive heat. This incredibly faint warmth slowly rises upward through the internal layers. When it reaches the bottom of the massive nitrogen glacier, it initiates a basic thermal convection process. The frozen poison slowly heats up, rises to the surface, cools down, and sinks back into the depths. The entire ocean is constantly boiling and turning over like a thick, freezing soup. This continuous geological heartbeat makes the surface of Sputnik Planitia entirely flawless. There is not a single asteroid impact crater visible anywhere on its vast white plains. If a stray space rock falls from the black sky and strikes this area, the churning nitrogen simply pulls it under. The debris is swallowed whole, dragged into the freezing dark depths, and completely erased from existence. It is a beautifully deceptive landscape, a pristine sea of white poison that silently consumes absolutely everything it touches. But what no one expected was waiting at the edges of this toxic sea. The true extreme nature of this distant world reveals itself precisely at the boundary where the flat white glacier meets the dark, rugged horizon. On our home planet, mountains are forged from heavy rock and silicate stone, pushed upward by immense subterranean tectonic forces over millions of years. However, in the deep, freezing darkness of the outer solar system, the conventional rules of geology are entirely rewritten. Rock becomes structurally irrelevant. The ambient surface temperature in this distant region plunges down to an unimaginable -390 degrees Fahrenheit. At this extreme thermal state, standard planetary physics completely shifts and our conventional understanding shatters. Ordinary water ice completely stops behaving like the fragile, easily broken frozen liquid we interact with on Earth. Instead, the profound cold forces the water molecules to pack together and crystallize so intensely that the resulting ice transforms into a rigid material. It becomes structurally harder and significantly more resilient than solid steel blocks. The massive razor-sharp peaks piercing the pitch-black sky are completely constructed from this super-hard water ice. These towering geological formations reach extraordinary vertical heights, easily matching the majestic elevation of the Alps mountain range back on Earth. They are absolute behemoths of frozen water, standing incredibly tall against the permanent twilight of the deep cosmos. Yet, the most deeply unsettling physical truth about these towering structures is not their extreme composition, but their terrifying relationship with the surface directly below them. Basic fluid dynamics and material physics dictate that standard water ice is significantly less dense than the heavy, slushy nitrogen that forms the vast, churning ocean of the Central Plains. Because the rigid water ice is physically lighter than the liquid nitrogen beneath it, these colossal mountain ranges cannot sink. Furthermore, the official space agency data confirmed that these towering peaks are absolutely not physically attached to any solid planetary bedrock underneath. They are entirely disconnected from the deep planetary crust. Consequently, these incredibly massive structures are continuously fracturing and breaking apart from the rugged, frozen shorelines. Once completely detached, they drift aimlessly across the boiling toxic sea. They operate exactly like gigantic icebergs floating in a terrestrial ocean, except these are entire, massive mountain chains, slowly migrating across a vast plain of churning nitrogen. The slow, relentless thermal convection of the poisonous sea constantly pushes these colossal, jagged islands of steel-hard ice across the alien landscape, eternally rearranging the physical geography of the planet. It is a completely alien geological paradigm where the solid ground itself is perpetually unstable, and the highest towering peaks are simply temporary travelers moving endlessly across a lethal, freezing ocean. Imagine watching a mountain range the size of the Alps drifting silently towards you across a white plain of poison. Let me know below, what would you feel if you saw this with your own eyes? The most unsettling part is not the floating mountains themselves, but what covers their peaks. When we observe mountain ranges on our home planet, we are naturally accustomed to seeing brilliant, pristine white snow capping the highest elevations. However, on this freezing, toxic world located at the extreme dark edge of our planetary system, the snow constantly falling from the alien sky is absolutely not white. It is a deep, dark, terrifying blood red. To comprehend this horrifying yet magnificently beautiful physical phenomenon, we must look upward into the extremely thin, incredibly fragile atmosphere surrounding the planet. It functions as a brutally efficient chemical engine. Even at a vast distance of over 3 billion miles, the incredibly faint light from our sun still possesses a profound and highly destructive physical influence. The solar radiation reaching this dark, distant realm still contains trace amounts of ultraviolet light. Although this ultraviolet light is hundreds of times weaker than what we experience on Earth, it remains powerful enough to trigger a continuous, massive chemical reaction high in the alien sky. The extremely thin atmosphere of this world is heavily saturated with methane gas. When the faint ultraviolet radiation constantly bombards this atmospheric methane, it violently shatters the chemical bonds holding the gas molecules together. This relentless atmospheric bombardment forces the broken methane particles to chemically bond with other available elements, specifically nitrogen and carbon monoxide. Through this constant high-altitude atmospheric chemistry, entirely new, highly complex organic compounds are continuously forged in the dark sky. The scientific community officially designates these newly created organic compounds as tholins. Under controlled laboratory conditions, tholins typically appear as a thick, dark, reddish-brown, tar-like chemical substance. However, in the extreme negative temperatures of this distant frozen world, these complex organic compounds absolutely cannot remain in a gaseous or liquid state. They immediately freeze into solid microscopic particles while still suspended high within the incredibly thin atmosphere. Once completely frozen, these heavy organic particles begin a slow, silent, and eternal descent toward the ground. They constantly fall through the pitch-black sky like a never-ending, incredibly slow storm of toxic, bloody ash. This ongoing atmospheric process creates a literal eternal snowstorm, but the precipitation is formed entirely from dark, reddish-brown organic molecules. Over the course of countless millions of years, this continuous eternal precipitation has steadily and relentlessly coated the entire alien landscape. It completely blankets the colossal floating mountains of super hard water ice. It heavily stains the jagged razor-sharp peaks, physically transforming the otherwise transparent, glass-like geological structures into massive, imposing monuments of dark red. The visual reality of this extreme environment perfectly embodies pure cosmic horror, yet it remains undeniably breathtaking in its scale. We are observing an alien landscape completely covered by towering, floating mountains of crystal-clear steel-hard ice, entirely stained by an endless, silent storm of blood-red snow. It is a freezing, highly toxic kingdom where the dark sky constantly bleeds complex organic chemistry onto the shattered, frozen ground below. This brutal chemical reality perfectly demonstrates that the deep cosmos is inherently terrifying without any need for fiction. The universe easily creates its horrific, beautiful masterpieces through pure physical laws. This dark red stain stretches across the horizon, marking a frozen world. The scientific analysis of this frozen world revealed a profound planetary paradox that initially baffled researchers. The massive left lobe of the heart-shaped feature, known officially as Sputnik Planitia, is essentially a colossal impact basin entirely filled with heavy frozen nitrogen stretching over 1,000 miles across. From a purely physical standpoint, this enormous accumulation of incredibly dense mass creates a severe structural imbalance on the planetary surface. Basic principles of orbital mechanics and rotational physics dictate that such a massive, concentrated weight should quickly destabilize the entire planet. Over millions of years, the immense gravitational pull should have forced the planet to physically roll over, dragging the heavy basin toward the equator to achieve rotational equilibrium. Yet, official space agency data confirmed that the planet remains perfectly aligned. The scientific community faced a monumental question. Why did this distant world not completely tip over? The resolution to this complex mechanical mystery brilliantly showcases the deductive power of modern astrophysics. To prevent the planet from rolling over, the fundamental physical laws of gravity strictly demand the existence of an equally massive and perfectly positioned counterweight hidden somewhere nearby. Researchers calculated that the only geological mechanism capable of providing this necessary counterweight is a massive subsurface body of liquid water, directly beneath the frozen nitrogen heart, trapped deep under the thick outer crust of super hard ice. There must be a vast, invisible global ocean. In the darkest, absolutely coldest region of our outer solar system, extreme planetary pressure and faint internal heat somehow keep an entire ocean in a fluid state. This revelation completely changes our fundamental understanding of the cosmos. It perfectly proves that liquid water exists entirely hidden in the absolute freezing dark. Furthermore, this buried ocean is absolutely not a quiet, dormant body of water. The planetary surface provides spectacular, undeniable physical evidence that the deep interior is highly pressurized and violently active. Searching the southern hemisphere of the planet, the spacecraft captured high-resolution images of two enormous, terrifying, and distinctly circular geological formations named Wright Mons and Piccard Mons. These towering structures span nearly 100 miles across and rise several miles into the pitch-black sky, featuring massive, deep central craters at their highest peaks. On Earth, we would immediately recognize these massive shapes as standard mountains of fire forged by shifting tectonic plates. However, in an extreme environment where the ambient surface temperature rests at nearly -400 degrees Fahrenheit, these are extraordinary and deeply unsettling geological beasts, known scientifically as cryovolcanoes. Instead of violently erupting glowing rivers of scorching molten rock and deadly volcanic ash, these towering ice monsters operate on a completely different thermodynamic spectrum. When the immense internal pressure from the subsurface ocean builds up, these cryovolcanoes aggressively erupt a freezing, incredibly thick, muddy slush. This highly pressurized mixture consists of liquid water, ammonia, and methane, physically driven from the deep hidden interior onto the freezing alien surface. The chemical presence of ammonia essentially acts as a powerful natural antifreeze, allowing the slushy liquid to flow briefly before rapidly freezing into solid rock-hard ice under the black sky. This continuous process of erupting and freezing slowly builds the massive mountains over countless millennia. These violent eruptions serve as undeniable proof that this distant world is absolutely not a dead, static rock. It is a vibrant, breathing entity, actively reshaping its own terrifying landscape in the deep dark of the extreme outer solar system. This distant, freezing world does not endure its terrifying existence completely alone. Locked in a permanent, silent gravitational embrace with the planet is its massive companion, Charon. To call Charon a simple moon is a fundamental misunderstanding of celestial mechanics. It is so incredibly massive compared to its host that their physical relationship entirely defies standard planetary laws. On Earth, our moon gently orbits directly around the center of our planet. However, in this extreme dark realm, the host and its giant companion actually orbit a completely empty point in the black void situated squarely between them. They operate as a true binary system, forever spinning around a mutual center of gravity. Furthermore, they are perfectly tidally locked. If you stand on one side of the primary planet, Charon remains permanently suspended in the pitch-black sky, never rising and never setting. If you walk to the opposite hemisphere, you will never see it at all. Charon itself is a profoundly fractured and tortured world, bearing the violent physical scars of a deeply parasitic relationship. At the northernmost pole of this giant companion lies a colossal, dark red stain officially named the Mordor Macula. For planetary scientists, discovering a crimson pole on a moon constructed primarily of water ice was incredibly unsettling. The physical explanation for this bloody discoloration reveals a beautifully tragic cosmic bond. Because the primary planet possesses extremely weak gravity, its fragile methane-rich atmosphere constantly escapes into the surrounding vacuum. As these gas molecules drift through the freezing abyss, the gravitational pull of the massive companion aggressively captures them. Charon physically siphons the bleeding atmosphere of its own host. The captured gas is drawn toward the extremely cold northern pole of the moon, where it rapidly freezes. Over countless millennia, faint ultraviolet radiation slowly bakes this stolen gas, transforming it into the dark red organic tholins we see today. They are two cosmic exiles, permanently bound in the dark, physically sharing the exact same bleeding atmosphere. Surrounding this melancholy central pair is a chaotic swarm of much smaller celestial bodies. 4 tiny moons, designated as Nix, Hydra, Kerberos, and Styx, wildly orbit the massive binary system. Unlike the graceful, permanently locked dance of the two central worlds, these 4 tiny guardians operate in a state of absolute, unpredictable chaos. They do not maintain stable, steady rotations. Instead, they tumble and spin erratically through the freezing dark, constantly destabilized by the shifting gravitational forces of the two massive bodies they surround. Planetary models strongly suggest these erratic, tumbling rocks are the shattered, frozen fragments of a violent, ancient collision that originally forged this strange system billions of years ago. This entire collection of worlds perfectly encapsulates the profound, lonely majesty of the outer solar system. It is a completely isolated kingdom of outcasts, executing a flawless, melancholy ballet in the absolute dark. As the spacecraft completed its primary observation phase, it continued its relentless trajectory deeper into the dark, uncharted territory of the outer solar system. Before leaving this frozen realm forever, the robotic explorer executed one final, perfectly calculated orbital maneuver. It turned its high-resolution optical instruments backward to observe the distant world one last time. In a moment of absolute cosmic beauty, the spacecraft captured the planet, perfectly eclipsing our distant Sunday. This specific celestial alignment illuminated the extremely thin atmospheric layers from behind. The resulting telemetry was completely breathtaking. Surrounding the pitch-black silhouette of the planet was a delicate, glowing halo of light. The transmitted spectral data confirmed an astonishing reality. This freezing, toxic world possesses a beautiful, pale blue sky. The complex organic particles, suspended high above the planetary surface, physically scatter the incoming solar radiation in the exact same manner as the nitrogen atmosphere on Earth. It creates a fragile ring of familiar blue suspended in the deepest, most alien darkness. This breathtaking final image stands as a profound testament to the inherent limitations of human perspective. For decades, we confidently judged this celestial body from billions of miles away, relying entirely on incomplete observations and terrestrial assumptions. When the scientific community officially demoted its planetary status to a mere dwarf classification, humanity collectively assumed its story was permanently concluded. However, the overwhelming physical reality we ultimately uncovered exposed our profound astronomical arrogance. Stripping away a human-assigned title did absolutely nothing to diminish the actual physical majesty of this distant world. It is absolutely not a dead, insignificant piece of floating cosmic debris. It is a highly active, incredibly complex geological masterpiece. It remains the undisputed, majestic king of its dark domain, silently ruling over a vast, frozen empire with terrifying beauty. It proudly endures completely independently of our narrow definitions. The universe isn't broken. Our map of it is just incomplete. Every anomaly we find is just the cosmos, whispering to us that there is so much more left to discover. What do you think? Does this change how you see our place in the cosmos? Thank you so very much for watching. The universe is full of terrifying yet beautiful mysteries, and exploring them together makes this journey incredible. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please subscribe and leave a comment below. I will keep exploring. See you all next time.